So, it's great to be here. I mean, it really is great to be here. I'd just also like to start by saying that I too have line managed Nick Pendry, but only ever by name. And my starting point, I think, for looking at how we marry systemic principles with statutory child and family social work was in Hackney a long time ago, when Nick and a colleague of his, Amanda, said that we should try and put some systemic practitioners in our duty system. And, you know, I know there are many of you actually that have been connected to Hackney during those years that we were there. And at that point, Hackney was really phenomenally busy and stretched. And we had huge numbers of looked after children. And we put Nick and Amanda in the duty team. And within 2 weeks, our looked after children figures started to fall. And we really knew at that point that we were onto something. Now, I'm going to talk to you, which is a bit of a reflective piece, because as I said, I've been immersed in systemic ideas now for over 10 years and have been involved in this attempt to transform practice for children and families. And that's been both on a practice level and thinking about our ideas that we hold about families and the reasoning behind the decisions that we make about families, but also in a local leadership role and more recently in a national role. Now, the caveat to everything that I'm going to say is that compared to the other people that are speaking here, I am an absolute novice. But I think that systemic practice has changed me as a leader and has changed me as a person. And for those of you that know me, if you think that this is a poor representation of systemic leadership, for those of you that don't know me, if you'd seen me 15 years ago, you would recognise at least some difference. Claire says that we're focusing on practice, and I'm going to talk a lot about leadership, but that's because I think social work leadership is about practice. And I think it's been a fatal flaw in how we have governed this statutory system of ours for the whole of my career. So I think that it's a really integral part of practice and how we work with children and families. So I'm going to talk to you about the shocking clarity of systemic social work and what I have learned about myself and about systemic practice along the way. Now, I think that I had some useful instincts that helped me be open to the idea of systemic practice. So I have always been really clear about my working life, that I want to do things differently. I always want to challenge the orthodoxy, whatever orthodoxy I'm in. I believe fundamentally in the importance of family. It is what carries most of us through life, and that where we separate families, it is our first duty to replicate that family and social support. Beyond good exam results and good dentistry, it has driven me, up the wall over many years about the performance culture that we have developed in child and family social work. It is wrong, and we have to change that approach. And I think that we are some way there. I'm very passionate about proportionate state intervention, that we should have minimal involvement in private family life. If we insist on interfering with other people's lives, then we must make sure that we've got absolute clarity of what we're doing there. Big on empathy and not blame. The power of stories has always been really important to me, which of course is a really key systemic principle. But these kind of negative, problem-saturated descriptions of family life and family functioning that I have listened to over the years has always driven me, again, up the wall. And getting things done has been really important, and so has focusing on what matters most. And what I mean by that is transcending all the stuff that we have around us constantly and really reminding ourselves that this is all about the children and families that we work with. So, there's a couple of things that I should say. That I'm a highly non-compliant person. And I was obviously, in a senior and influential position in Hackney, and we commissioned a year-long programme with the Tavistock on systemic leadership. And, everyone was expected to go, and it was really important, and I went twice in the whole year. And I think that one of the things that's really important about that is that not everybody learns in the same way. And that, how I learn is by doing. And I think a lot, I read a lot. That is a solitary activity for me. But then what I do is I apply that in practice and by doing. So for those of you that, are thinking, how do I navigate this territory when it seems very heavy on training and theory and so on and so forth, there are other ways to do it. So I think that for me, what systemic practice gave me suddenly was a really crystal clear framework that I could organise myself and the things for which I had responsibility. That it gave a conceptual framework for everybody. It was a constant frame of reference for everything that we were doing in the organisation. And clarity, it's such a relief. But one of the things that I think people get confused by is clarity doesn't mean creating lots and lots of rules so that everybody is clear about everything that they're doing every second of the day. That is not what clarity is. What we need to be doing is that we have some really strong tram lines, and I'm always, I'm a kind of command and control by nature, and have had to sort of straddle my sort of instinct in that way, and what I know are good leadership principles. But I still think that you need, particularly in our work, a very, very strong framework within which you work. But then, of course, you can let go, and that you can enable flexibility within that structure. And of course, if you do that, and what I really learnt, and this is one of the most profound lessons of my whole career, is that if you change that system, people change with it. And I have seen practitioners who were on their knees with the pressures of statutory work blossom into some of the best practitioners that I had in my service. It was phenomenal, and I will never forget that. But a caveat to that is that not everyone blooms. And when you are running a team or a service, you have to recognise when people just cannot cut it, because it is no good to anyone. And so you can see this, command and control systemic thing. It's important that you have these kind of firm tram lines. And I think it's taught me to be a bit kinder, because what it does is this enables you to have room to understand, and to understand why people do the things that they do, and to have a much more systemic understanding of why things are the way they are. But again, and particularly in statutory social work, there is this real tension between understanding but people taking responsibility, so that you can understand why somebody has done something and understand that in the context of their relationships. But actually there are some things that you just have to say are not okay, and that people have to take responsibility for it. Okay, now of course the other thing that I really learnt is that this is the real organisational chart. I love this slide. And we all talk about structure and blah blah blah, but actually whether it's a team or a service, this is what you're managing. You're managing people's relationships constantly. So it's very much a question of who loves who hates who's been betrayed, who feels belittled, who's jealous, who's frightened, who's over-enthusiastic about the opening of their new centre. All these things, these dynamics really impact. And any of us that have been in a position of influencing whatever system you're talking about, and actually this relates just as much to families, is that you realise that actually that is a lot of what you are navigating and trying to understand. Now, these slides are still not right, but anyway, let's not worry about that. Hold on. Okay. I'm just ignore those. I'm just going to carry on. I have learnt so much. I think one of the really big things that I learnt was the difference between being adversarial and being inquisitive. Now, I remember that Mark Stancer, who some of you will know, he's the AD in Lambeth, a big systemic person. I remember him coming to me at a party. In fact, it was Julie's party. This is years ago, and sometimes I used to almost sense my senior managers having had a little, pre-chat about how they might want to bring something up with me, and they thought that a party was a good idea, might be a little bit more relaxed. And Mark really tried to explain to me that wanting to pursue the intellectual chase is not the same as finding the best solution for a family. And again, this is one of the most profound things that I learned, because anyone that knows me, I love an argument, and I will fight tooth and nail to win it. And if someone then stops talking, I think, hey, I won, I'm right. And of course, that isn't true. But it's sort of an example of how over time I really learnt about things. I think that leadership nirvana for me, which I really discovered, is when everyone starts leading you. And it took a long time for us to get to that point in Hackney, but we did. And I would often have various of my heads of service and other people in the system just saying, can we think about this again? There are lots and lots of phrases that we will come across in systemic practice, which I just love, and I still suffer with that certainty constantly. But there was a woman, Deborah Phillip, that many of you will know, and she was a really key member of our team, and she died really tragically in the middle of our transformation programme. She was absolutely fantastic, and my goodness, she kept me on the straight and narrow. It kills me to say it, but other people do sometimes know better than me. And she was absolutely one of those people. And of course, what I've seen is the way that we build these systems of systemic practice and how it creeps slowly, and then suddenly it's everywhere. And my experience of that was, originally we had the kind of, Deborah, Nick and Amanda show, and then we had the Deborah, Nick and Amanda and Stuart and Julie and Mark and Karen show, and then we had the Deborah, Nick and Amanda and Stuart and Julie and Mark and Karen and Charlie and Sarah and Liz and Jackie and Hazel and Marilyn and Michael, and then we had 300 people in the service who were all talking in a way that it got to the point where half the time I didn't understand what anybody was saying. But it was fantastic, to see and watch this practice transformation. Some more kind of real, key phrases that I was introduced to. So safe and certainty, and I know Barry's going to talk about that later, but so important to give people permission in your organisation not to know. I was, I'd be always racing on with my absolutes, certainty, this is what we should do, and I'm absolutely certain about that. And then there'd be that, which I found, tiresome sometimes, would be, well, it's both and, isn't it? And I'd be going, if it has to be, yes, all right. And then there was the slowing down to speed up. I was like, really? We've got to slow down? What do we want to do that for? And then we'd have to slow down, and I'd be sitting there kind of drumming my fingers on the desk while we all thought a lot. And but actually over time it worked. I did just want to mention that halfway through this big process, we got really into thinking and talking, and it was great because actually we don't do enough of that when we're thinking about what we do with families. But it did get to the point where I would think, what on earth is anybody doing? We've got to do something here. And I would say, can we just have a little less talking and a little more doing, please? So there was that real kind of push and pull about when you talk and when you have to act. People were always telling me, it's not very systemic, is it? And then I'd be eye rolling, But eventually, of course, it does get under your skin. And this way of working I found to be enormous fun. And for those of you that are embarking on this journey, that this positive change generates enormous positive organisational energy, and it is a great thing to be part of. Very quickly, I just wanted to say a little bit now about what's happening now. So 10 years on from those years, a little longer actually. And we have, I think, this national expanding community of interest. Now, systemic practice, has been around for years and years and years, but I think it has been trapped in particular teams or particular evidence-based programs. And actually, when you look at whatever label you put on it, whether it's relation-based social work or restorative practice or strengths-based practice or science of safety, these all have their underpinnings in systemic theory. So we had, 300 people in Hackney all those years ago. There's 300 people here today. Melissa was saying that in Triborough it's 800 practitioners alone. That we have First Line that has a systemic focus, and that in a couple of years' time we've got 400 First Line managers trained. The practice development programme, the national programme, will have 60 practice leaders. We only need 150 at any one time. In a couple of years, over 1,000 people will have been trained in Frontline, which is the qualifying programme for social workers. And there are thousands, and literally too many to mention, who are now trained and functioning in systemic systems. So I think overall we have a much stronger focus on practice. We are, trying to build a national infrastructure which recognises the importance of practice. The innovation programme has been going for a couple of years. It's funded a range of systemic-based programmes. On your tables, I think that there's the overarching summary of the learning outcomes from some of those key programmes. I think that we, in terms of an evidence base and how you should be designing practice systems, I think that there are some very, very clear design principles that we should be following when we are running children's social care systems. That learning, of course, will now be picked up by the What Works Centre for Children's Social Care. We have just launched that, and there's up to a 20 million investment in getting to the real detail of what we should be doing and why when we're working with children and families. Partners in practice that Melissa has already talked about, but there's a growing number of authorities now that are joining to really focus on how we get the best practice in local areas for children and families. We've got a new national system of practice reviews, which is to replace the, I think, very blaming system of serious case reviews. So again, really trying to shift the system to learn rather than blame. The National Programme for Practice Leaders, we're just about to launch the programme for practice supervisors nationally. And then we've got national post-qualification accreditation and regional teaching partnerships. Now, all these things are building this national infrastructure. And the fact that most of them have got practice in the title is by design, because language matters and we need to keep people focused on that thing about what matters most. So last piece from me, there's more to do. The watchers. Now, those of you that have known me for a long time have always been banging on about the watchers. I'm not sure what to do with them. I think that it's about what we think the contribution is to the checks and balances in the system. Now, we need checks and balances, but the type of checks and balances that we have in the system, I'm not sure, is the best use of resource and the best use of the talent of the people that often end up in the watching roles. We've got to do more on responsibility with authority, so I really aspire to having professional autonomy, that as an individual social worker you feel able to be responsible for what you do because you have the authority and autonomy to be so. I would love to see many more examples of practice-based career pathways, so still, almost always, when you move into more senior roles in the organisation, you no longer practice. And there's got to be a better way of doing that. I think we need much greater national clarity about the outcomes that we are trying to achieve within children's social care. And resource is a big issue. Because there is this question mark about how much resource do we need. We know it is incredibly fractious out there at the moment. We've got public spending reductions. Lots of people are saying that that is having an impact on how we can work with children and families. And it certainly is having an impact. But I suppose I want us to own that. And I think that, regardless of that financial context, we have to be doing the right thing by children and families. And I still think there is miles of difference we could make, even without not spending another penny. And my big passion, back to those kind of instinctive things in me, is that we have to stop the trajectory of state intervention. For those of you that have seen the latest statistics, that whilst our numbers of children in need, relatively speaking, are fairly steady, the numbers of children that are going into care proceedings, that are coming into care, that we subject to 47 inquiries, is just not okay. And we have to do something, and I think it's us that can do something about that. Finally, I think everywhere I go, there are like-minded people. And, I presume you're like-minded in at least some of those ways. I think that we could be at a tipping point in this country about how we think about families and how we support and help families. I really hope so. And just to end, back to Deborah, actually. And those of you, anybody that knew Deborah, loved her. She was fantastic. Oh my goodness, she would be so overwhelmed as she saw what happened 10 years on. And she always used to say to us, we just have to search for national treasure. And I'd say, Deborah, it was here all along. Thank you.